Welcome to the High Performance Disciple podcast. My name is Gareth Morgan, and my goal is to help you close the gap between your God-given potential and your daily performance. What I do is I explore the explosive combination of timeless spiritual principles and high performance practices that will enable you to take control, to be courageous, and to release the greatness that is in you. This conversation is designed to help high achieving, high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, athletes, and pioneers turn fear into faith, confusion into clarity, frustration into focus, and stress into strategy. If you enjoy what you hear, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, to comment, and share it with others that you believe in. Here's today's conversation. Welcome to the High Performance Disciple podcast, episode 5. If you've been joining us for the first few episodes, welcome back. If this is your first time, then hey, there's already some content that you may want to check out as we look at those spiritual principles that combine together with high performance practices to help you go to the next level, to go further, to go faster, to become all you can become. That's what we're interested in. And I believe today's conversation is crucial to that journey of who you're becoming and how you can be at your best. Let me share a quick story with you. It was back in 2014. We were on holiday. And before I went on holiday, I'd had an interaction with somebody who had made me aware that there was some office space available in their work, and their work was subletting some office space, and it was in London, and it was in the tallest building in London. Significant structure called the Shard. And it was one of those comments where, it was mentioned to me in one sense seriously, but also in one sense kind of like aspirationally, jokingly, hey, there's some space available. And when I heard that, and at that time we were in the process of feeling like we wanted to do something in London, that was part of our journey as a church, as people who were also feeling that there was something in us that needed to come out, something that was going to impact and influence business and society. And so even though that wasn't clear as to what that was, there was just this sense in which, well, why not? Like, why not look into this? And I was having a conversation. We went on holiday. I was having a conversation over coffee with Leanne, and I just said, I'm just going to email and just say, no, it's way out of our range, way out of our thinking, or even where we are right now. Because I was feeling like, okay, I'm somebody who loves to think big, but I was thinking, well, maybe this is just too much. And Gareth, you're being far too over-optimistic, lowy expectations. And I was talking to Leanne, and thankfully, she really challenged me. She was like, no, why don't you just go check it out? Like, what harm can be done? And so I was really encouraged and challenged by my wife to follow through with it. We went back from holiday, and I ended up going to visit the premises. Now, I knew factually the realms of possibility of this coming about was 1,000,000 to 1. Like the cost of a building like that, and even what would we need that building for at the time was still kind of, wasn't clear. But I knew that this was a challenge for me. This was going to challenge the size of vision that I believe I carried. And so I made the arrangement to go and visit the building. And I remember going on the train to London, and then on the underground, and then going up these escalators right by the building at London Bridge. And as we rose up on these escalators, there was the Shard in front of me. If you've ever seen the Shard, it is humongous. And as I saw it, I thought, wow, it's a Goliath of a building. And the moment I introduced that concept and that thought came across my mind, of course, We know there are two characters in the story. We mentioned it in the last episode. There is Goliath, the humongous enemy, opposition, intimidating behemoth of a man. And then, of course, there's the little shepherd boy David, the underdog. And in that moment, I was like, well, Gareth, this is Goliath. Are you going to be David? David small, David seemingly inexperienced, disproportionately positioned and skilled for the task at hand. Yet, of course, we all know the story. He takes out Goliath with a sling and a stone, and he brings about the most unlikely victory. Well, as I went up this escalator, this was the story that was playing out in my mind. And feelings of intimidation that came on me were immense. As I walked into the incredible reception and this really professional, high level of environment that I walked into, spoke to my inadequacy. It said, Gareth, who are you, Gareth? Like, who are you even to walk through the door? Never mind to even have a conversation of hiring office space. Anyway, long story short, I went, I visited, I had a look around, I crunched the numbers, and of course, factually, it absolutely was right. It wasn't the right time. It certainly wasn't the right cost. But the process was really important to go through. Because what I learned through that brief experience was that we have to walk into situations designed to intimidate the old version of ourselves out of us. We need to understand that there are two versions of us. There's the version, and I'm going to use the story, jump back into the story of David, because again, whether you're a faith person or not, whether you're a Christian or not, we can use the principles, that code of success that the Bible offers us to learn something. And in the story of David, as the Israelites are rocking up each day, singing songs of victory but not following through to action, living a virtual victory but not experiencing it in reality, you've got David and his brothers. And David and his brothers are almost like the two identities that are fighting inside of each of us. And so we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the story and to identify the brothers' reaction to the situation and David's reaction to the situation. And what is it that David did that the brothers didn't do? And what is it that you and I need to do with the old version of us, the brother, in order to shut that voice down and to amplify the voice of David, the winning you, so that you walk into intimidating situations and you grow. You don't avoid them. Like, how many intimidating environments do you avoid? How many intimidating situations do you walk into and do you play it safe? Like, we all do it. I'll give you an example. When people go into networking events, if you've ever been to a networking event and you're not the most confident of persons, typically what people will do in networking events is if they don't know anybody there, their phone becomes their safety blanket. Like, we pretend to be texting somebody, we pretend to be on the phone because we don't want to look lost. We're feeling intimidated, and so we put our energy into looking like we're not losing. But that isn't growing us. That's self-preservation. Or maybe you do talk to people, but you look for the safe conversations. You look for the people who aren't intimidating, and maybe the other people that look lost like you. And so you justify only having conversations with lost-looking people by saying, well, I'm here to help them. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying don't help people to feel included. Absolutely, we must. None of us are better than anybody. We must all seek to increase the size of our relational network and to reach out to all people. But I'm just challenging why we do what we do. maybe there are conversations in that kind of environment we hide away from. We hide away from the confident looking people because as soon as we're in front of them, their confidence is going to shine a light on my lack of confidence. And I don't want to look at what intimidates me. But I'm challenging you. It's time. When was the last time you walked into an intimidating situation? And what was really interesting about that story about the Shah, just coming back to that literally was a couple of weeks, I think 3 weeks, before we ended up making the decision as a family to move to London, to move from a market town, which I'd always lived in, and to move to a city that we'd never experienced living in as a family. And I know that moment of walking into that Goliath situation where I felt intimidated was a key part of me being made ready to make that transition. And that transition is far bigger than geography. It's much more about how I see myself, how I see my future. Like, is my future big enough to warrant thinking big and expansively? Can I become and grow into the kind of person that seizes that kind of future? Anyway, let me jump into the story because I want you to really catch something that we learn from David. So David walks into this situation. He's delivering food to his brothers. Remind you of the situation. Israelites on one mountainside, Philistines on the other mountainside, and the valley in between. Goliath, the behemoth of a man, is stood in the valley shouting up to the Israelites, send somebody down to take me on. Whoever wins the battle. So all of the Israelites repeatedly, day after day, heard the same challenge, sung songs of victory, but wouldn't walk into the valley of intimidation. They remained on the mountainside using all their energy to do what had become familiar and comfortable to them. And that generated a sense of winning, but it wasn't a win. Big challenge here. What are we busy doing that is falsely generating a feeling of progress and winning, but deep down we know all we're doing is avoiding doing the very thing we need to do? And we avoid it because it intimidates us. Or we avoid a conversation we should be having because that conversation intimidates us. So David comes onto the scene and he comes to his brothers and he starts to talk to them about what's going on. So this is what happens in the conversation between David and his brothers. Eliab, David's older brother, heard David speaking with the men around him about, what would happen if somebody beat this Goliath. And of course, we looked at last week the fact that David made really clear the vision of the outcome. Whoever beats this Goliath, not only would the victory for the nation be achieved, but for the person, the outcome would be they'd be married into royalty, they'd have the king's daughter, they'd have tax-free living for the rest of their life. Financial security would be captured in that moment. And David made that vision really clear, and that inspired him to action. But when David's older brother Eliab heard that this conversation had taken place, he says this. He says, "Why," to David, "have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Eliab challenges David's motives. He challenges his identity. Like, who are you to be here right now, little shepherd boy? Why did you come down here? I know how wicked your motives are. I know that you're only in this for yourself. And those accusations of the older brother are the words, the sentences, the languages, the questions of the intimidating opposition that we face in making progress. Think about it. Whenever you want to do something that is aspirational, maybe you've got that intimidating voice saying, well, shouldn't you just be content with what you've got? Are you just being greedy? Why do you want more than you've got right now. Your parents never had more than this. Why do you want to push beyond the boundaries of those in your industry? Are you just trying to look better than the rest? These are the kinds of questions that attack and rebel our intentions. And we've got to understand them, because if we don't realize that there are two opposing voices happening in our internal dialogue, the losing conversation versus the winning conversation, then we'll assume and we'll give validity to those accusations. We'll believe that maybe those accusations are a reflection of just having a good conscience. Maybe I am a bad person. Maybe I should just be content. And it's amazing how we can almost like sanctify accusations that are made from the intimidating voices that we carry. But we need to expose them for what they are. We need to expose them that they are simply trying to sabotage our potential. And so David's older brother, we've got an Eliab inside of us that is accusingly asking these questions, challenging our motives. And if you're a Christian especially, and somebody who's a value-driven person, you don't even have to be a faith person. So then sometimes it's difficult to think big and to dream big, because maybe you've been taught to be content with what you have, which of course we look at and we think, well, that's a good quality, that's humility. But C.S. Lewis told us humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's just simply thinking of yourself less. My vision to help a million plus people become influential coaches in their environment and industry is not about me. It's about them and the people that they can serve. But if I listen to the intimidating Eliab that's inside of me, I'll be saying things like, well, Gareth, you just want that because you want those people to look to you. Like, you want to be the centre of attention. You want to be the person who says, well, I was the one who caused that to happen. And all those accusation voices come about. And I need to make a decision. Am I lowering the goal, reducing the size of my vision, because I believe it's because of a sanctified reason? In other words, I believe it's because I need to be humble and I need to think less of myself. No, you don't think less of yourself. You simply think of yourself less. Make your vision all about other people, but make your vision big. Make your vision demand that you increase in terms of your growth and development. You become all that you can become. And Eliab, and this is the key thing about Eliab, and we have it inside of us. And again, sometimes we can be the Eliab to other people if we're not careful. Eliab was projecting his own intimidation onto David. When we don't deal with our own internal conversation, we project it onto others. Maybe right now you're dealing with situations where you're dealing with very unreasonable people. Maybe people who are really challenging to lead or manage or to take on a journey. Maybe relationships that are at breaking point, and you're thinking, I can't even think on the same level as the other person. Maybe, just maybe, what you're interacting with is their Eliab. On the inside of them, they are trying to deal with something, but they're now projecting that. They are becoming the Eliab. And you're trying to rationalize with something that right now that they can't even grapple with. And in moments like that, what we learn from David, and this is the next step now, we've got to identify the voice of Eliab. We need to shut it down. And the verse 29, if you want to look at the passage of this story, it's in 1 Samuel 17. But verse 29, David responds to Eliab and these accusations. He says, now what have I done? Can't I even speak? Really interesting. He separated Eliab's conversation from his own conversation. He recognized, this is not my voice. When I went up that escalator that day, and I was thinking, like, who am I? I'm not the kind of person that should even be walking into this building. Never mind thinking about letting it or letting some space. In that moment, I had to understand that's not me. That's not my voice. I need to speak. The authentic identity needs to speak. Then look at what David did. Verse 30 says, he turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. In other words, we need to know when it's time to turn away. We need to know when it's time to turn away from that losing conversation, whether that's with somebody else or whether that's our internal dialogue. We need to know when to turn it away or turn it down, and to have the same conversation but with a different voice. You know, as a high performer and a high performing leader, we need to recognize that not every opinion, not every voice is valid in terms of what we take on board. Every person is valuable, but not every opinion and voice is valid in terms of what they're saying, especially when people are dealing with their own intimidations. We need to have conversations with people who we can actually process factually what's going on, and also people who have a sense of faith or expectancy about the future. Don't ignore the fact that there's a giant, but don't allow the giant to determine the next move. Allow the future that's beyond the giant to ultimately help you make the next decision. And David knew that my future, and previously he had been anointed king, so he knew that in his future there was something of significance. He knew that there was a moment in time that was greater than this moment, and he allowed the future plus his deep conviction about his God to determine his next move. And we talked last week about that weight of certain belief multiplied by that speed of consistent action, and David ran towards Goliath. But then what we now understand is, not only do we need to understand the voice of Eliab, not only do we need to run into intimidation, not away from it, and turn away from the wrong voices and turn to the right voices, but we also need to understand the power of our words. You see, this was a physical battle that was taking place. And Goliath was stood before David, kitted out in incredible armor. He was ready to defeat anybody that came along his path. But listen to what happens, because Goliath is spouting out all this spiel about how he's going to tear the person apart. And David comes before him and he's basically like, I'm going to have you for lunch. But David says this. He says, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. What's really interesting and powerful, and the principle that we can get from this, is as follows. The situation was a physical battle, and Goliath was only viewing it from the physical side of what was going on. For instance, I'm massive, you're tiny, I'm kitted out, you've got nothing but a sling. He was only looking at the physical dimension. But what we've got to understand is this: the physical dimension, the facts of the physical, the facts of what can be seen are secondary. All the time they are secondary to what is unseen. There is a greater power, a higher power of what is taking place, and it's in the unseen. And I'm not just even talking about whether you believe in God or not. And again, that is my worldview. That's my faith. But I think we can all agree that everything that is seen starts in the unseen place. Every idea that happens that is an invisible thought becomes a visible reality if it is seen through to action. And so the real battle was not in the physical. It was not in the physical valley between this physical giant and a physically small David. It was actually in the unseen. The weapons that were being used were not physical weapons. They were invisible weapons. What are those weapons? Words. Words are my weapons. The weight of my words will determine the battles that I can be victorious in. David was smaller than Goliath. He was disproportionately unable physically to take on Goliath. And yet, the size of his conviction was far greater than Goliath. The size of his words, the size of the future that he knew laid ahead was far greater than any vision that Goliath had in that moment. And so David says, I'm not coming against you with the physical weapons. I'm coming against you with the weapons that really matter, which are the weapons of my words, the weapons of my belief, the weapons of my convictions. So what we're understanding through this interaction, what we're understanding based upon my story, and let me go back to my story. I realized since then that breakthrough that I had, and that realization that I've got to shut down the voice of Eliab, that voice that challenges my motives, which really is my intimidation in disguise, that I've got to turn away from that. I've got to turn to other voices. And for me, it started with Leanne. I had a conversation with Leanne. I allowed her faith and expectancy to speak to my fear. Who do you need to have a conversation with right now to maybe highlight what is fear and what is faith? Not only that, I understood that what I now say in this situation, it may not immediately change the facts. Yeah, I was financially unable to go and purchase some space in that building. It was not the right time or the right season. But it was about my belief. I am the kind of person. My future says that I am the kind of person that can and will be using buildings like this, or be operating at a level that is far beyond where I am right now. And those are the words that I need to keep cultivating. Again, it's not about me looking good. It's not about ego. It's about the vision. If my vision demands that serving people requires me to be in a building like that, or to be in a city like that, or to be operating a business, or to become a CEO, or to become an entrepreneur, or whatever it is that your dream says, or to go and build 100 orphanages, whatever your dream says, your words need to be in alignment to the dream, not in alignment to the intimidated brother called Eliab that we all carry inside of us. And from that moment on, there were so many more environments that I walked into where the intimidation would start to rise. But I realized in those moments, my words are my weapons. Circumstances may say I'm not big enough, but my words internally say, this is what I can see. And this is the first of two practical things I want to say to you. Ask yourself when you feel intimidated, what is it I see? When I say see, I'm not talking about looking at. We look with our eyes, but we see with our hearts. What's the future, your vision that you can see? And then based upon what I can see, the future of impacting so many people, having the influence on so many people's lives, based on what I see, this is now what I need to say. I am enough. I can walk into environments like this with my head held high, with a confidence and a belief that I am capable to make an impact. The weight of your words. I hope that this conversation has helped you to understand that we need to deal with those conflicting conversations that we have. Deal with Eliab. Empower the David, because the Goliath, he's coming down. Whatever intimidates you, it's coming down, because your future demands that he does come down. I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can get more by subscribing to my channel, and I have more content and tools that can help you on your journey if you'd like to head over to garethmorgan.tv. Remember, today and every day you are a champion, and there is more in you than you think.